Panama and the vital canal linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The new president has repeatedly said that the U.S. should take back control of the waterway.
This is the Panama Canal, a 51-mile corridor linking the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans.
Trump is claiming that Panama has broken a promise to remain neutral, alleging that China is operating the canal.
The Panama Canal has been a major waterway for global trade for over a century. Recently, something unexpected happened that forced the United States to shut it down completely.
Panama's promise to us has been broken, and the spirit of our treaty has been totally violated. American ships.
This sudden closure surprised many people who rely on the canal every day. The reason behind this decision is still unfolding, and it has left experts and officials searching for answers. What could have been found that made closing such an important route necessary? Join us as we explore why the USA just closed the Panama Canal after a shocking discovery.
The most expensive project also that was ever built in our country's history, if you bring it up to modern day costs.
Panama Canal's hidden politics and global implications. Even with all the tools available today to track global shipping routes, many people were still caught off guard when reports spread that a section of the Panama Canal had been suddenly closed. For over a century, the Panama Canal has remained one of the most important passageways in the world, cutting travel time for ships by thousands of miles. Since 1914, it has connected the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, helping goods move faster and nations keep their trade lines open. So, when any kind of disruption takes place, no matter how brief, it naturally causes concern. Was this just a normal response to something temporary, or is there a bigger issue hiding beneath the surface? Keep watching as we walk you through everything. Over the years, the canal has dealt with weather delays, maintenance, and even diplomatic disagreements, but recently the headlines began to sound more dramatic with claims that a shocking discovery had been made. People believed that the U.S. had stepped in directly to shut down the canal, leading to speculation online and in the news. But before jumping into the details of that, it's helpful to first look at the facts. The Panama Canal isn't owned or run by the U.S. anymore. In fact, since December 31st, 1999, control of the canal officially passed to the Republic of Panama. That transition came after the Torrijos-Carter treaties were signed back in 1977, setting a deadline for the U.S. to hand it over. Since then, Panama has been fully responsible for its management through the Panama Canal Authority. Still, even after giving up control, the U.S. never stopped caring about what happens there. That's because about 5% of the entire world's trade moves through this canal. For the U.S. alone, hundreds of millions of dollars in goods pass through this narrow path every week. Military planners also continue to monitor it because its location remains critical for naval movement and national security. So, any sudden closure, especially one linked to an unusual discovery, will raise eyebrows. Some of the early reports that got attention came from dock workers and engineers working near the locks. These are the large water chambers that help ships rise and fall between ocean levels. In one case, it was said that digging operations were halted when crews hit a hard, unknown surface beneath the canal floor. There was no official word on what it was, but the area was quickly marked off. Equipment was moved, and workers were sent to other locations. Shortly after, there were rumors that the object was metallic. Others believed it was an old military structure buried during the Cold War. A few even suggested it might be something left from before the canal was ever built. The truth is, strange things have been found in Panama before, long before the canal existed. The entire region has a long history, much older than many people realize. Before the French or Americans arrived to dig the canal, this land was home to native civilizations. Some of these early peoples left behind pottery, tools, and even stone foundations now hidden under layers of jungle and soil. Archaeologists have found petroglyphs carved into stone surfaces, some of which point toward ceremonial or burial grounds. And even today, discoveries are being made. In fact, there is so much to be explored in the region because so much of it remains overgrown and hard to access. So if something unusual was found during canal maintenance or expansion, it wouldn't be the first time history came to the surface. But it's important to pause here and look at what the canal itself actually is. Most people see it as just a waterway, but building it meant cutting across an entire continent. Engineers had to carve out rock, divert rivers, and create massive lakes and artificial valleys. This involved digging through layers of untouched land. In doing so, workers often found fossils, bones, and even human remains from ancient times. One well-known example is the discovery of prehistoric shark teeth and mammal fossils deep in the canal walls. These findings go back millions of years and are now preserved in local museums. In 2014, during expansion work on the canal, scientists uncovered the bones of a 19-million-year-old crocodile species that had never been seen before. In other areas, turtle shells, giant sloth bones, and extinct horse species were found, all buried under layers of rock and mud. So when crews say they hit something unexpected beneath the canal, it's possible they stumbled upon yet another piece of the past. Whether it was man-made or natural, we don't yet know. The only clue we have is the reaction. Machines were stopped, the area was sealed off, and information was tightly controlled. But how has U.S. interest evolved over time? And what is President Trump's stance on the Panama Canal? A choke point of global power. Every few years, American officials visit the region to discuss security, maintenance, and economic cooperation. Though the canal is Panamanian territory, the U.S. Navy still includes it in its planning. If anything threatens the flow of trade or increases the risk of instability, the U.S. will naturally keep a close eye. This is not new. During World War II, for example, the U.S. heavily protected the canal with troops, radar systems, and even secret bunkers. The fear was that enemy forces might try to block or damage the canal, cutting off a critical supply route. At one point, U.S. engineers even explored building a second canal in Nicaragua, just in case something happened to the one in Panama. That project was eventually dropped, but it shows how valuable the canal has always been. In more recent times, Panama has invested billions to upgrade the canal, making it wider and deeper to handle bigger ships. These improvements opened in 2016 and included new locks and lanes. Since then, global use of the canal has increased, but so have the problems. Climate change has led to longer dry seasons, reducing water levels in Gatun Lake, the massive reservoir that powers the canal's locks. This has already forced some limits on ship weight and size during the dry months. Add to that natural wear and tear, and you get a clearer picture. The canal is under constant stress. Engineers are always reinforcing the banks, checking for shifts, and watching for faults in the structure. Sometimes that means discovering something buried in the process, and sometimes those discoveries come with complications. Still, not everything about the Panama Canal today is about digging, fossils, or logistics. A new angle has emerged, and it's coming directly from American politics. In December 2024, President Trump brought the canal back into the spotlight.
My administration will be reclaiming the Panama Canal, and we've already started doing it.
By claiming that the United States, despite being the canal's biggest user, was, in his words, being severely overcharged and not treated fairly. He didn't stop there. He went on to suggest that America might take the canal back or something very powerful is going to happen. It was a bold statement, especially coming more than 2 decades after the U.S. formally handed control of the canal to Panama. Those familiar with the canal's history and trade policies know that these words hinted at something bigger. There's no treaty language that allows the U.S. to simply take the canal back. But there's always been a debate in Washington over whether the 1977 treaties gave away too much, too soon. You can see why Trump might want to revisit the terms. As someone who's always focused on deals and leverage, the canal represents one of the few global choke points where the U.S. has enormous exposure, but no direct control. Every container ship that crosses from Pacific to Atlantic represents a piece of the U.S. supply chain. If those costs go up or access is somehow restricted, that becomes a problem. And from Trump's view, the current arrangement doesn't benefit the U.S. nearly as much as it should. But what really makes the situation more complex and possibly more urgent is what happened in another recent development. Earlier this year, BlackRock, a U.S.-based logistics giant, acquired a controlling stake in the company that operates the ports at both ends of the canal. This means that while Panama still runs the canal itself, an American company now plays a key role in how goods are loaded, unloaded, and moved through the zone. To some, that sounds like just another business move. But this changes everything. Control of the ports means control of the flow. That is, someone other than the Panamanian government can influence the speed, pricing, and access given to certain cargo. In other words, while Panama owns the water, the gates leading in and out are now tied to American corporate hands. For someone like Trump, that opens a new kind of playbook. He's not just talking about retaking physical control of the canal. He might not even need to. If the port operations are in American hands, that gives Washington or any future administration a tool for leverage. It adds weight to Trump's complaint about being overcharged, and it makes his threat about something very powerful sound a little less vague. This move also caught the attention of trade analysts in Beijing and Brussels. Both China and the EU have large investments in Latin American shipping routes. China, in particular, has tried for years to gain influence in the region. It already runs some ports in South America and once expressed interest in building a rival canal in Nicaragua. So when a U.S. company gains control of strategic shipping infrastructure in Panama, it doesn't go unnoticed. It affects more than just economics. It affects diplomacy, influence, and access. This brings us to the uncomfortable truth that the Panama Canal has never just been a waterway. It's always been a symbol of control. And whenever control shifts, the global balance tilts with it. And what better way to understand what is happening now than to go back to the early construction days of the canal? Keep watching. The early construction days of the Panama Canal. As far back as the early 1900s, during the first stages of construction, workers reported strange findings while digging through the dense Panamanian soil. Some spoke of carved stones that didn't match the surrounding geology. Others uncovered clay vessels and spearheads buried several meters below the surface. Most of these items were dismissed at the time as remnants of local tribes. But there were a few reports, never officially confirmed, that hinted at objects that didn't seem native to the region at all. Fast forward to today, some researchers have argued that the Isthmus of Panama may have once been part of a much older network of civilizations long before the Spanish arrived. This claim is not entirely without foundation. Artifacts from ancient peoples, whose identities remain unclear, have been found not just in Panama, but stretching from Central America down into parts of Colombia and Ecuador. The idea that an ancient civilization once crossed or even settled along what is now the Canal Zone isn't impossible. And that brings us to the current situation. Historians often refer back to the fact that Panama's narrow land bridge was once completely underwater. Millions of years ago, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans flowed freely across this region. Only later did tectonic movement push the seafloor upward, forming the isthmus. That event drastically changed world geography. It connected the two American continents and separated marine species forever. It also created the only land path between North and South America. It's possible, some argue, that as humans migrated north and south through this narrow land strip thousands of years ago, some of them may have stayed. Early cave paintings and stone carvings support this idea. And if these early settlers built anything in stone or left behind ceremonial chambers, those structures could now be buried under centuries of growth, soil, or in this case, concrete and steel from the canal. Geologists familiar with the area say the soil near the canal is layered with volcanic rock, clay, and marine sediment. Digging deep enough into these layers could very well uncover preserved structures. It's not a guarantee, but it's not out of the question either. After all, similar discoveries have happened in other parts of the world where ancient temples were buried beneath modern cities, only to be rediscovered centuries later. Interestingly, the timing of the discovery lines up with scheduled maintenance, works tied to the ongoing drought in Panama. Due to low rainfall in the region, canal authorities have reduced the number of ships allowed through per day. This lower traffic gave engineers an opening to perform deeper foundation checks and clear sediment buildup in lesser-used channels. It was during this process that the object, whatever it was reportedly struck. But rather than continue excavation, everything was shut down. That's the part that confuses people most. If it was simply rock or debris, there would be no reason to cordon off the area. But if it was something unexpected, like a sealed chamber, it would explain the sudden pause. What also adds to the mystery is the history of U.S. intelligence and scientific involvement in the region. Not all of their operations were made public. Some documents related to the programs remain classified. It's not a stretch to assume that officials might be eager to investigate anything unexpected found underground, whether ancient or modern. Of course, there's also the simpler explanation. The discovery might be geological in nature, but still significant. A hidden fault line, gas pocket, or sinkhole could threaten the canal's long-term structure. In that case, authorities would be right to keep the matter under wraps until assessments are complete. Any panic about structural instability could hurt international trade and insurance rates. So keeping details quiet would be a strategic move, not necessarily a mysterious one. Still, it's the silence that fuels curiosity. What's known is that engineers stopped work in one section of the canal. The area was sealed, Whether or not a man-made structure has been found remains uncertain. But history tells us this wouldn't be the first time something hidden for centuries was accidentally uncovered by modern machines. And when such things come to light, they often change what we thought we knew about the land beneath our feet. Besides, in many ancient cultures, water played a spiritual role. Rivers, lakes, and underground streams were seen as sacred pathways. If anything symbolic or ceremonial was hidden beneath this land, it would make sense that it lies close to or beneath flowing water. Whether that's the case here is unclear, but the pieces are starting to form a picture, one that suggests this closure might have far more to do with history than just shipping routes. And when you think about it, the United States has a long history of intervening where ancient secrets might be involved. From 1904 to 1999, the U.S. controlled the Panama Canal zone and exercised exclusive rights in the area. During that time, there were stories, mostly forgotten or buried in obscure books, where troops were brought in and local laborers were kept silent. Some believe a closure of the canal would just be another instance of history repeating itself. We have seen similar shutdowns happen in other parts of the world. In Iraq during the early 2000s, for example, there were reports that military contractors closed off ancient ziggurat sites claiming security issues while artifacts kept being stolen. In Egypt, too, certain chambers under the Sphinx were sealed off after unexplained objects were found with ground-penetrating radar. So, is Panama the latest entry in this strange list? You cannot rule out the possibility of that, especially when you consider what we'll reveal next. How the Panama Canal is failing. The Panama Canal was once seen as a miracle of engineering. It took decades to build and change how the world moved its goods. For over a century, it helped ships avoid the long, dangerous trip around South America's southern tip. But now, a different story is unfolding. The canal is struggling, and not from war or sabotage, but from a slow, natural battle happening beneath its surface. Most people don't see it coming, but those who look closely know the warning signs are already here. The numbers speak clearly. In 2023, officials were forced to cut the number of ships allowed through each day. Normally, the canal could handle around 36 to 38 ships daily. That number dropped to fewer than 24. Some ships had to lighten their loads or delay their trips altogether. For companies depending on tight schedules, this was a major blow. Even more troubling, forecasts suggest that these water shortages will only get worse in the years ahead. A look at the canal's structure will help us to understand this better. The Panama Canal relies on the Gatun Lake and Alhajuela Lake. These lakes store rainwater and serve as the main source of water for the locks. But Gatun Lake, in particular, is now shrinking. Satellite images and water level measurements show a steady decline. Each time the rainy season fails to deliver enough water, the reserves drop further. And when the lake gets too low, large ships can't pass through without scraping the bottom or getting stuck. The canal's problems also highlight a deeper issue that the original builders never expected: this kind of long-term climate shift. When the U.S. built the canal in the early 1900s, the region was wet, lush, and full of rain. Water shortages were almost unthinkable. But now climate change is shifting rainfall patterns and making dry seasons longer and more intense. In short, the system wasn't built to survive the world we live in today. For solution, one idea that officials have explored is to build reservoirs to store more water during rainy seasons. Another is to introduce water recycling systems so less is wasted during each lock cycle. But these fixes are expensive, take years to complete, and can't guarantee success. In the meantime, ships wait, water drops, and the pressure keeps growing. There's also growing competition. Not too long ago, Panama completed a major expansion of the canal to allow larger ships through, the so-called Neo-Panamax vessels. But now, even those ships face restrictions. In some cases, the Canal Authority has limited how much cargo they can carry due to weight limits tied to the falling water levels. This turns a billion-dollar expansion into a limited-use option. And while the canal was supposed to meet rising global demand, it's now unable to deliver on that promise consistently. This has led some shipping companies to explore other options. The Suez Canal in Egypt is one alternative, though it's much longer and still faces its own risks. Others are even considering new routes through the Arctic as ice melts in the north. It's a troubling sign when the Panama Canal, once the fastest, safest shortcut, is slowly being bypassed. It gets even more concerning when you understand that the stakes aren't just economic. The canal also plays a major role in Panama's national income. It contributes over $2 billion each year to the country's economy. As traffic drops, so does revenue. This affects everything from public services to national development. Many Panamanians fear what could happen if this trend continues for another decade or two. There's also the human side. Farmers and communities who rely on the same lakes that feed the canal are struggling with water shortages. Some areas have had to ration water or rely on deliveries during dry spells. The more the canal needs, the less is left for everyone else. This is why many experts say the canal's future depends on how quickly and effectively the region can adapt. Engineering fixes are part of the answer, but managing water use, planning for unpredictable rain, and protecting forests that feed the watershed are just as important. Deforestation in Panama has reduced the land's ability to absorb and release water gradually, making floods worse during rainy seasons and droughts worse when the skies dry up. Some hope rests on new technology. Better forecasting models, satellite data, and AI are helping predict water levels and manage ship traffic more efficiently. But even the best models can't make it rain. And without rain, the canal remains at the mercy of nature. The world hasn't paid much attention to this slow-moving crisis. Other headlines take the spotlight, but behind the scenes, port managers, logistics officers, and trade experts are watching the Panama Canal very closely. A small delay here can mean empty shelves somewhere else. A shallow lake in Central America can change global shipping patterns. For now, the canal is still open. Ships still pass through, but the cracks are showing, both in the concrete and in the system itself. If the world wants to keep relying on this narrow stretch of water, big changes will need to happen. This is because the battle beneath the waters is already underway, and it won't wait for permission. If the trend continues, the world might look back at this moment and realize it missed the warning signs. Not because the canal suddenly failed, but because it ran out of water. But then, one would ask, what exactly is the U.S. government involvement now? The U.S. government closure. The U.S. hasn't shut the Panama Canal down. Instead, it's been applying behind-the-scenes influence, using diplomacy and logistical support to protect its interests. The slowdown of canal traffic has led to rising concerns in Washington. With so much U.S. trade flowing through the canal, every delay hits American companies. Grains from the Midwest, fuel from the Gulf Coast, consumer goods heading to Pacific ports all depend on this narrow waterway. So while there's no military action, there's definitely movement. Agencies within the U.S. government have started taking steps that feel like warnings. This includes rerouting certain military and commercial cargo, flagging high-risk vessels, and stepping up monitoring of transit lanes through allies in the region. Diplomatic pressure is also growing. U.S. officials are urging Panama to take urgent steps to protect the canal's future. Behind closed doors, there have been talks about water management, conservation policy, and outside help. The U.S. message is simply about the needs for the canal to function, and it's willing to get involved with or without Panama's full agreement. At the same time, the U.S. is also stepping up in a helpful way. The Army Corps of Engineers, known for building and managing major water systems in the U.S., has offered assistance. They've sent teams to help study Panama's lakes, examine lock systems, and propose improvements. Climate agencies like NOAA and NASA are also contributing. They're using satellite data and long-term weather models to help Panama understand how rainfall patterns are shifting and what that means for the future. This offer of aid is strategic. If the canal continues to struggle, global trade routes will change. That would affect the U.S. economy in deep ways. So helping Panama is about keeping the system stable. Still, not everyone sees it as just support. Some in Panama fear that too much U.S. involvement could lead to a kind of soft control. After all, the canal was under U.S. control for nearly a century before it was handed back to Panama in 1999. There's still strong emotion tied to the canal's independence. So while aid is welcome, it comes with political sensitivity. Internationally, the world is watching. Shipping companies, insurance firms, and financial markets are closely monitoring the situation. Every time there's a drop in ship traffic, shipping costs rise. When delays increase, global schedules fall apart. The Panama Canal may sit in Central America, but its heartbeat can be felt from Singapore to Rotterdam. Some regional governments, especially those in Latin America, are now calling for a multilateral approach. They believe the canal should be treated not just as Panama's responsibility, but as a shared interest. After all, it serves the whole world. There's growing support for a coalition of nations, possibly working through the United Nations or other global agencies, to help Panama manage the canal as a protected global asset. These discussions are not just about trade, though. The canal's struggle is part of a broader crisis. Climate change is starting to hit the systems we thought were permanent. Droughts, shifting weather, and unpredictable rainfall are already affecting other trade routes, like the Rhine River in Europe and the Mississippi River in the US. What's happening in Panama is just the most visible example. That's why the future of the Panama Canal is now being discussed in climate summits and environmental forums. Scientists and policymakers are using it as a case study and a warning of what happens when infrastructure built for one climate is forced to survive in another. The lesson is that we can't keep moving goods across the world if we don't also manage the water, land, and air that make trade possible. And the future is anything but certain. If Panama cannot find a long-term fix, if it can't store more water, recycle it, or find a new way to operate, the disruptions will get worse. Ships may start to reroute permanently, new trade corridors might be built, and Panama could lose its central place in the global system. For now, the U.S. remains involved through technical teams, climate specialists, and high-level meetings. It's not a battle over power, but a race against time. America's involvement is about necessity. The canal still matters, and the risks of doing nothing are becoming too large to ignore. What happens next will depend on how fast Panama, the U.S., and the wider world can come together. Because while the canal is still open today, nature is pushing back. And unless that challenge is met with action, the world's shortcut may no longer be the fast lane, but a bottleneck that chokes the very flow it was built to protect. What do you think about the idea that climate and politics could really shake up one of the world's busiest waterways? Do you believe the U.S. involvement will help or complicate things further? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.